Hey guys, it's Vadim with MaxTech and welcome to our gaming review of the 16-core M1 Pro MacBook Pro. Now, as I've already shown you in the previous gaming review of the M1 Max model with the 32-core GPU, that is an absolute beast for gaming. But the question that we're gonna answer in this review is how much worse is the 16-core M1 Pro, and is it still a good value if you're trying to do some gaming? So what I did is I went through the old video and I literally took down notes of the FPS that we got with the 32-core M1 Max and screenshots of all the graphics settings and resolutions, and I am gonna play the same games on this 16-core machine and show you guys actual charts comparing the differences in FPS for the different games and methods that I used to play the games. So as you guys can see right here, I have Crossover 21 open, and I would say that this is absolutely the best method for playing Windows games on your new M1 Pro or M1 Max MacBook Pro. And the installation is actually very easy. You just download Crossover 21, then install the Windows version of Steam, and then you install the dependencies like DirectX for modern games, and then enable DXVK within the Steam bottle, and you're basically set to go and play your favorite Windows games. And the best part is that you get a 14-day free trial to test it out, and when you decide to buy it, which I think you will because it works so well, it's $60. However, we actually have a coupon code MAXTECH25, which brings it down to only $45 if you use our link. So go ahead, use the link in the description or the pinned comment for that discount. And I actually have a huge surprise for you guys because within this video, I'm revealing our 3 winners of a 1-year Crossover 21 license key. As you can see in our previous video, I announced it, and I'm gonna go through those comments and pick out 3 lucky winners. So let's go ahead and do that now. As you can see, I'm in commentpicker.com. I put in the URL, filtering the duplicate users, and let's pick the first winner. All right, there you go. The first winner is Eric. His comment said, "I want it." Well, guess what? You just won a 1-year subscription to Crossover 21, so congratulations. Let's go ahead and pick the next one. There you go, Cy Hunter Cy saying, "Hope there will be more native games next year." Yes, I hope so as well. So I'm gonna reach out to you. And for the third winner, let's see. We have Hubrecht, I think, Hubrecht. "I just purchased a M1 Mac Mini and really want to win the giveaway." Congratulations, you just won the giveaway. So if you see this, reach out, and I'm gonna try to reach out to you as well. And there you go, congrats guys on winning those license keys. And if you end up trying to purchase it, once again, use the code MAXTECH25 for 25% off your Crossover subscription. So without further ado, let's jump right into the gaming. And before we get into Grand Theft Auto 5, Witcher 3, and other games like that, I'm gonna start off with Rocket League. And here we are in the settings, and I've matched up all the graphics settings to exactly what I played with on the M1 Max 32-core model. So let's go ahead and test out the FPS that we're getting. Woo! Yeah, definitely doesn't feel like it did on the M1 Max where I was getting 60 FPS. Unfortunately, I don't have a FPS counter. Still pretty smooth. I mean, it's definitely playable. Whoa, a little bit stuttering there. So it feels like it might be like, I don't know, 40 or 50? Hey, get out of here. Woo-hoo-hoo! I mean, if you're insanely competitive, I don't think you're gonna wanna play at these settings. You're gonna wanna probably turn them down a little bit more. Yeah, I'd say like 45, 50. And now moving on to the next game, we have Diablo III right here, and this is actually a port to macOS, so it's running using Rosetta 2 translation, so it's not native performance. So let's go ahead and test it out. Before we get into it, here are the settings. We're running at native 3.5K resolution, that's 16:10 for the aspect ratio, full screen, high texture quality, medium shadows, physics high, full screen anti-aliasing. So let's apply, accept these settings, and let's get into it. All right, now this is very interesting. I'm sitting at 88, 85 FPS right here as we're walking through town. Now I do want to mention right away that on the 32-core M1 Max, we were actually looking at a range between 124 to 164 FPS in the town area. So we're definitely getting less FPS, and we're not taking full advantage of the 120Hz ProMotion display that these new MacBook Pros have, so it's definitely cutting down a little bit. But as far as the range, it's staying very consistent at around 85 to 88 FPS, so it's still very good. Guys, I could definitely tell I'm not getting as good FPS anymore, just running through here, 82 right now. But throughout the gameplay that I've done so far, I think the lowest that I've seen was 62 while fighting. And I feel like the highest was around 88 or 90 while fighting as well, so not too bad. Oh, I just hit 58 right there actually. 55 FPS. All right, there you go, I died. Well, the lowest I saw on the 16-core M1 Pro was 55 FPS to a high of around 88. Now, comparing that to the M1 Max, I was actually getting 95 to a high of 138 on the 32-core M1 Max, so you're getting a pretty big boost in graphics performance in Diablo 3, so I'd say it's definitely worth it going for the M1 Max, at least for this game. And now on to the next game, we have Starcraft II, which is also emulating x86 code using Rosetta 2. So let's start off by going into the settings. And here we are, we got full screen, 3.5K resolution. Once again, I've got graphics on custom. I've set the shaders to medium because if you go up to high, it basically ruins the FPS like crazy. So I've set it to medium, ultra shadows, ultra terrain, ultra effects, ultra textures, medium post-processing, extreme physics, high models. Basically, there you go. Those are the settings that I played with on the M1 Max, so let's test it out. All right, so I've got my FPS counter, and because this is 3.5K res, it is so tiny and hard to see, but let me take a look. Looks like we're getting a 51 FPS right now, and it's staying pretty consistent. Not too bad, but definitely not great. Now on the 32-core M1 Max, at this point in the starting area, I was getting between 100 and 120, so it was disappointing to be looking at 44 FPS right now. That is definitely disappointing. And man, it's now down to 37. That is just so weird. Definitely not as optimized with this M1 Pro. All right, this is really weird. Now that I'm not looking at my base, it's now up to 112, 117 FPS. Huge difference. Now look at this. I'm on my base with all my SCVs, goes down to 35. But now that I'm out in the open, now it's what, 65, 70? It's ramping up slowly, 90, over 100 now. I did not experience that with the 32 core. All right, now that I'm fighting, looking at 40 FPS, man, it is stuttering. This is not good, guys. 29? I just hit 29 while fighting these guys. So it looks like we're getting between 29 and 50, 55 FPS while fighting. Now on the 32 core M1 Max, I was getting 90 to 95 while basically fighting in the opponent's base, which is a huge improvement, and it's above 60. Such a massive difference between the 16 core and the 32 in Starcraft II, wow. Now in the last video, I also tried out 1920 by 1200, which is a little bit higher resolution than 1080p. So let's do that on the 16 core and see how much FPS we get now. So the FPS counter is a little bit bigger, and let's just do some fighting. Now we're sitting at a much better frame rate, sitting at about 95, 89, not bad, 89 FPS, 97 I just got there, 106, 108. I guess now that all that stuff died. So it looks like between 90 and 100 with these lower 1920 settings, and that is compared to 98 to 114 on the 32 core, so it looks like we didn't really gain that much on the 32 core by lowering the settings, but we did on this 16 core, so keep that in mind. It's still pretty good if you just lower those settings down on this machine. And I do want to mention that the fans are literally idling during that gameplay, so you can't even hear the fans compared to a lot of Windows laptops, which would be blaring even in a game like Starcraft II. And now switching over to a native game. Yes, this is built natively for ARM64 Apple Silicon World of Warcraft. Let's test it out. Now for the graphics settings, I'm matching it up once again to the M1 Max. So we got full screen, native resolution, 3.5K once again, and I've set the graphics quality to 7 out of the maximum 10. And right away, I'm in the same section as it was on the M1 Max, and it looks like we're sitting at around 85, 83. Oh, I just saw it dipped 79 FPS. It just dipped to, 77. I actually saw 77 FPS to around, 75 FPS. I just saw it hit to a high of 85 in this section. Now, the M1 Max, in this exact spot with the same settings, was sitting at 146 to 178. That is so much higher, basically 2 times more FPS, and that kind of makes sense because it's fully optimized and native and super impressive in this area. Now on the other machine, I also brought it up to graphics quality 10, so let's test it out on this machine as well, and right away, I'm getting some bad FPS. Definitely some stuttering. I think I saw it hit 46 FPS, 45 FPS right there, and I think the highest I saw right now is 52 FPS, so this is obviously unplayable, especially if you're trying to do raids or anything like that. So comparing that FPS to the M1 Max, we were actually getting around 96 to 105 on the 32 core, which is definitely much better. And then finally, the last thing I did was put down the resolution to 1920 by 1240, and right now it looks like the lowest that I've hit is about 94 FPS, and we are getting a little bit over 100 at times, which is good to see at around a little bit higher than 1080p, but we did, look at that, 92 FPS. We just hit a low of. And once again, the M1 Max was getting between 160 and 180 during this. So honestly, if you're playing World of Warcraft, literally go for that 32 core once again. And now moving on to some Windows games, let's jump right into Grand Theft Auto 5. We're using Crossover, and we're actually using the nightly beta build. So it's not quite into the public release yet, but you can actually go into Crossover's website and then sign up to be a beta tester and basically play Grand Theft Auto 5, including the online mode, but pretty soon I do expect it to be built into the public release. And there you go, GTA 5, let's run it. And here we are, once again in the settings. We actually have the resolution to 1920 by 1200, a little bit higher than 1080p because this is a more tough game to run because we're going through Crossover, so it's basically translating Vulkan into Metal, and it's also using Rosetta 2 to translate x86 code into macOS ARM native code, which is a lot of translation going on, so that's why we have that resolution. And going down, we've got the texture set to very high, high on the shaders, shadow quality normal, high, normal, sharp. Basically, you guys can screenshot that or use those settings for yourself to compare. Let's get into it. Here we are, and man, this is not running well. Look at all that stuttering and the drop frames. This is not running anywhere close to 60 FPS. Oh, and so much worse than the 32 core M1 Max. This is pretty bad. Oh, look at all that stuttering, man. This is kind of hard to play. Actually, it feels like it's like, I don't know, dipping down to like 20, 25, 30 FPS. Probably somewhere between 20 and 30 most of the time. Sometimes it does pretty well and it looks pretty smooth, but other times it just like stutters and drops like crazy, like that. There's no way you're gonna be playing at these graphic settings. You're gonna have to turn them down. Now on the 32 core M1 Max, it was actually much more playable. It was sitting at between 50 to 55 FPS, and that's just my estimation because unfortunately the FPS counter is not working through Crossover Steam for some reason, but it was much more smooth, almost a good solid 60. But this right here, between like, I don't know, 20 and 30 or something like that, it's much harder to play. So what I did last time on the M1X is I dropped the resolution to 1280 by 800, dropping it quite a lot to try to get some better FPS. So let's do that right here. As you can see, the graphics quality, pretty garbage. And even still, even though it's a lot more smooth, I don't think it's at a solid 60, because I am still getting some drop frames here and there, and it's just not overall like super smooth. So yeah, this is, yeah, pretty glitchy, and we're probably getting between like, I don't know, 35 to 45 FPS right now, whereas on the 32 core M1 Max, we were literally at a solid 60 at least, so it was perfectly playable on that M1 Max. So honestly, if you're gonna be doing crossover gameplay with Grand Theft Auto 5, I definitely recommend going for that 32 core M1 Max for this game. But the great thing about Crossover 21 is that Grand Theft Auto Online is also working, which is awesome. So let's get into that. All right, there we go. And oh my goodness, look at those drop frames. Yeah, at these settings, even at 1280 by 800, it's still not really playable, man. All right, we're doing some survival just like I did on the M1 Max in the last video. And let's see how much FPS we get. And surprisingly, it's still doing pretty good. Around 35 to 45 FPS in GTA Online with this machine. So still performing decently. Definitely not super smooth. Whoa, that was like a weird drop frame there. Oh man. So here it looks like I'm getting a pretty decent 35 to 40 compared to the M1 Max. I was getting around 45 FPS, so definitely a little bit better, but not perfect in GTA Online. Now, before I get into playing The Witcher 3, I actually want to open the macOS version of Steam, where I have a couple more games like Counter-Strike Go, Dota 2, and Path of Exile. So let's start out with Dota 2 first. Here we are in the Dota 2 settings, and we set it to 2560 by 1600 resolution. We've set the graphic settings to literally maxed out all the way, just like I did for the M1 Max in the previous video. So let's test it out. All right, guys, this is actually surprising because this is the first game that I'm not seeing that big of a difference. The lowest FPS I saw so far just fighting here in the beginning is 72 FPS, and the highest is actually up to 100. The M1 Max got between 98 and 117, so it's actually not that big of a difference at all. Now with that said, in the last video, I also brought up the resolution all the way to 3.5K native res, so I just switched to that res and I want to test it out. So now that I've brought up the resolution, it didn't actually go down that much. The lowest I saw was about 59 to a high of 79 on this 16 core compared to the 32 core, which was between 87 and around 95. So to be honest, it looks like Dota 2 isn't that well optimized, and it's not really taking advantage of the 32 core M1 Max like it should. So I guess for Dota 2, the 16 core M1 Pro is probably fine. And if you need a little bit more FPS, just turn down the graphics settings and you'll have no issues. And our next game is CSGO. This is wildly popular, and let's answer the question of if you can play CSGO on the 16 core M1 Pro. The first thing we're gonna do is once again go into the graphics settings, and luckily we do have an FPS counter, which is awesome. So here you go, here are the settings. We're sitting at 1920 by 1200 resolution. That's again higher than 1080p, 16 by 10. Going down to the settings, we have medium for the global shadows, medium for the textures. There you go, a lot of these are set to medium, so just scan them for yourself right here, and let's get into the gameplay. Of course, I'm doing arms race because I love that mode. Gotcha. Oh, snap! Woo! Woo! Now, so far, this is actually performing really well, guys. I'm surprised by this 16 core because it's doing really decently. Now, since this game gives us a very wide range for the FPS, I'm gonna split it up into two charts, one for the minimum FPS that we see, and one for the high FPS comparison to the M1 Max. Now, the lowest FPS I saw so far was 47 FPS for this 16 core compared to 62 FPS on the 32 core M1 Max. So that's actually nice because you're never going below 60, whereas here you are going down to 47 at a minimum, which actually I'm surprised by because it's not that much worse than 62. So not bad optimization for this 16 core. However, on the high end, this 16 core looks like it got up to 101 FPS at one point compared to 129 on the 32 core. Now, one thing I tested on the 32 core was I actually brought up the resolution to 2.5K, so 2560 by 1600, but I've turned down the advanced settings down to low on most of the settings, so let's try it out on this model. All right, and there you go. Our FPS counter just got a little bit smaller now that we increased the resolution up to 2.5K. Now, that's actually very impressive resolution, and not a lot of people play CSGO that high, but woo! Let's test it out. Come on, bro. I know you're coming here. I got you. Woo! All right, guys, this is bizarre because cranking up that resolution didn't really impact FPS that much, which is super impressive so far. And now with the higher resolution, I'm getting between 44 and as high as 93 FPS on this machine, which is super, super impressive compared to between 68 and 103 on the 32 core. So this is crazy well optimized, and I'm impressed by this M1 Pro. So I kind of feel like if you bring the settings super way down, you'll be able to get away with playing CSGO on this 16 core. But if you want really consistent FPS above 60, you definitely want to go for that 32 core. And now moving on to the next game that we're running under Rosetta translation, we have Path of Exile. Here we are in the graphics settings. We got a lot of this set to default, off for the anti-aliasing, shadow set to the default, ultra shadow quality, high for the sun shadow, number of lights set to high, depth of field enabled, high, 16 times texture filtering, and basically we've turned off the dynamic resolution as well so it doesn't mess with it. Let's see what we get. And now that I'm actually out here fighting, the lowest that I saw was 36 FPS up to around 50 compared to the 32 core M1 Max, which is literally stuck at 60 FPS all the time. It never went below 60, so that's very interesting. So basically, once again, if you want that perfect 60 gameplay, you gotta go for that 32 core M1 Max. Now, I know a lot of you guys are gonna be asked about the 24 core model, and we have ordered that, but it was delayed, so we're still waiting to get that. So hopefully within the next week, we're gonna be getting that 24 core model, and oh my goodness, this guy's trying to kill me. Woo, kill him! Boom! Owned him. So yeah, we're definitely gonna test the 24 core, so if you're not already subscribed, do so right now because we're trying to hit a mil before the end of the year, and that would really help us out. And by the way, we got our new M1 Max Tech SoC hoodie, which you can find in the merch shelf below, so if you appreciate all of the testing that we've been doing for the past couple of weeks, please support us with that if you can. And now for the next game, we have, of course, Minecraft. We're playing this at native 3.5K resolution. We've got the render distance set to 10 chunks, graphics on fast, smooth lighting on maximum, clouds on fancy. So let's get into it. All right, so I've been walking around in the demo, and so far the lowest FPS I've seen is around 75 FPS, and I think it went up to around 120. So that is actually really impressive because on the 32 core M1 Max, I got between 76 as the low to 131. So even on this 16 core, this game is really well optimized. Either that or maybe the M1 Max isn't being taken full advantage of because this is pretty good FPS for the settings that I'm using. Keep in mind it's 3.5K native resolution. Of course, this is Minecraft, incredibly easy game to run, but hey, looks like you could have some extra headroom to turn down the resolution and install some mods if you want to. And there is actually a ARM native version which you can set up. There's a tutorial online that you can find to get basically double the FPS as you're seeing right here. So that is pretty cool. Now moving on, the next game we have is the very popular League of Legends. So let's see if the 16 core is gonna be just fine for this. Here we are in League, once again, 3.5K resolution, native, all the graphics settings maxed out all the way, which is pretty impressive. And so far, the lowest FPS I've seen while actually gaming and fighting was 61 FPS on this machine, going up to as much as 88, which is pretty impressive. That's compared to the M1 Max 32 core, which was between 75 and 95. So even this 16 core is doing incredibly well. This is actually very impressive. And then when you're just walking around, like in base, it actually goes up to 100. So at this native res, this is really good optimization for this 16 core. And I would say that for League of Legends, you absolutely do not need the higher end 32 core M1 Max, because you have a lot of room to turn down the resolution to get better FPS. So that's really impressive. It didn't even go below 60. And now going back to Crossover 21, this is a Windows game, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. So here we are in the graphics settings. We're sitting at 1728 by 1080 resolution, and we've turned down quite a few of the settings down to low because, again, we're going through Crossover, and this is a pretty demanding game, even though it is a little bit old. So let's go ahead and jump in and start playing. All right, unfortunately, we don't have an FPS counter, but man, I'm getting so much stuttering and drop frames here that, man, it seems like it might be like kind of unplayable. It's just all over the place. Oh, here we go. Oh, this is not gonna be easy. Woo! Oh, man. So once you start getting into fights, man, it's like, oh no, it's like unplayable. It's like stuttering, it's glitching. It is not good. I don't know what it's like 30 to 40 FPS or something? Definitely not a good experience playing The Witcher 3 with the 16 core just because of all the crossover stuff going on. So with that said, I'd say this is running at around 30 to maybe 35 FPS. It's not good at all, definitely stuttery. Compared to on the 32 core M1 Max, we were getting 45 to 50. So even though it wasn't perfect 60, it was still playable on the M1 Max, whereas this, I don't think it's playable with these crazy low settings. So there you guys go, and now that we got all of those games out of the way, let's answer the original question. Is the 16 core M1 Pro good enough for gaming, or should you go up to that 32 core M1 Max? Well, first of all, I'd say that if you're doing any Windows gaming using crossovers or anything else, you've got to get the 32 core M1 Max because of all the translation going on, like Vulkan to Metal and then x86 to ARM with Rosetta 2. There's just so much going on that you need the extra GPU performance for sure. Now, in a lot of the games that are more optimized, we did see a huge jump in performance with the M1 Max, and it's totally worth it if you're doing any gameplay, but there are a couple of games like Dota 2 or League of Legends where it just wasn't that big of a difference going from the 16 to the 32, but even still, the M1 Max was just that much better to where you could get perfect 60 or higher FPS in basically any game that we tried. So that is the sweet spot to get perfectly consistent FPS, and in a lot of the games, you also get to take advantage of the 120 Hz display because you're reaching higher frame rates so you can be more competitive. But either way, if you are going to be focusing on gaming, definitely go for that 32 core M1 Max. That's just my opinion. But if you're just more casual and you don't mind turning down the settings way low to get good FPS, then the 16 core M1 Pro should be fine. But for any Windows gaming like Crossover 21, definitely go for the M1 Max. So if you're gonna be doing that, you can use the promo code MAXTECH25 to get 25% off a 1-year license for Crossover 21. Definitely do that. So hopefully you enjoyed this video and got some good conclusions between those two machines. Thanks for watching. Be sure to click the circle above to subscribe for more videos like this one. Check out the original M1 Max gaming review right over there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.